Tengan a ustedes muy buenas tardes por sumarse hoy. Bienvenidos a los que están llegando temprano. Vamos a estar comenzando en unos minutos. Vemos que están entrando de todas partes. Tenemos habilitado el chat para que nos vayan contando dónde se conectan. Le damos la bienvenida a la gente que va llegando a tiempo. Bienvenida Guatemala, Argentina, Uruguay. Bienvenido de Cali, de North Carolina, de Estados Unidos, Ecuador. Bueno, ya empieza México, empieza a moverse el chat. Eso es lo que nos gusta, ver cómo todos van presentándose, se vienen sumando. Vamos a darle unos minutitos más para que la gente pueda seguir conectándose. De Colombia, de Paraguay, de Quito. Saludos desde Venezuela. Vienen más de Argentina. México está presente, claro que sí. Ayer hubo bastante gente de México también presente. Saludos desde Chile. Bienvenido Brasil. Bueno, un minutito más. Así empezamos. Y 5. Y 5 para mí, hora argentina. Sigue sumándose la gente. Gracias a todos por inscribirse, gracias a todos por venir. Bueno, bienvenidos a la primera sesión del segundo día de la Semana Iberoamericana de la Educación Global 2021. Es una serie de eventos organizados por AFS, Programas Interculturales y ALEI, la Alianza Latinoamericana de Educación Intercultural. Agradecemos a la audiencia por su inscripción y participación en esta conferencia titulada Fotografía Iberoamericana en Competencias Globales según la prueba PISA. Así como se hizo en 2020 y conscientes de las diversas realidades educativas en Latinoamérica, ALEI organiza esta semana de eventos con el objetivo de visibilizar el desarrollo de competencias globales en el aula y hacer un homenaje al educador brasileño Paulo Freire. Trataremos de conectar 3 pilares del legado de Freire: investigar, dialogar y transformar, con el desarrollo de una educación global activa, como es la misión de AFS Programas Interculturales. Mi nombre es Michel Thibó, soy director de Relaciones Institucionales y Marketing de AFS para Argentina y Uruguay, y seré su anfitrión durante esta sesión. AFS es una organización no gubernamental de base voluntaria cuya misión es formar ciudadanos globales mediante experiencias interculturales transformadoras. Nuestros programas e iniciativas impactan miles de vidas cada año mediante un aprendizaje que dura para toda la vida. Para entender el alcance que tiene AFS en el mundo, tenemos presencia en más de 60 países, contamos con más de 50.000 voluntarios y cambiamos la vida de 12.000 participantes y más de 8.500 familias anfitrionas cada año. Contamos con más de 5.000 alianzas con comunidades educativas y en términos de becas, AFS realiza una inversión cada año. Nos vamos a tomar ahora un momento para que la audiencia pueda familiarizarse con el Zoom, la plataforma que estamos utilizando hoy. Pueden ver ahí, como les muestra la imagen, el micrófono. Están todos silenciados para que no haya ningún tipo de inconveniente. Abajo a la izquierda también tienen la cámara. Si tiene la rayita roja que la atraviesa es que nadie nos está viendo, pero queremos invitarlos a quienes puedan que la mantengan encendida para quienes dan la conferencia. La verdad que es agradable cuando alguien puede ver a quien le está hablando. Pueden participar con las reacciones que tiene el Zoom y cualquier pregunta que quieran dejar, el chat va a estar habilitado constantemente y vamos a ir leyéndolas para que podamos ir respondiéndolas. Queremos conocerlos un poco mejor y por eso vamos a realizar ahora una encuesta antes de comenzar nuestro taller. Vamos a utilizar un panel dentro de la plataforma, el cual se les va a mostrar ahora, y les brindaremos unos segundos para que nos vayan respondiendo desde dónde se conectan hoy. Bueno, veo que algunos ya estamos familiarizados con el Zoom, vienen respondiendo bastante rápido. Ya tenemos más del 60% de los participantes que han contestado la encuesta. Vamos a dejarla unos segunditos más. Bueno, hoy tenemos Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador y Venezuela. Son quienes más están presentes hoy aquí. Después continuamos con el Cono Sur, Norteamérica, Brasil. Gracias a todos por haber venido. Esta sesión de hoy de la Semana Iberoamericana va a estar dividida en dos partes. Primero, la plática de Andreas Schleicher, director de Educación de la OCDE, y luego abriremos a preguntas o comentarios. Para guiar el evento, damos la bienvenida a nuestra moderadora Ivonne de León. Ivonne es miembro del Consejo de Fiduciarios de AFS Internacional y voluntaria de AFS Guatemala. Ivonne es especialista en procesos de transformación humana y socia fundadora de Tansilent, basada en Miami, Florida, Estados Unidos. Sin más espera, te damos la palabra, Ivonne, para continuar con el evento. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos.
Michelle, muchas gracias. Es realmente un gusto estar hoy con ustedes. Hoy tenemos en este foro el honor de contar con la presencia de Andreas Schleicher el día de hoy. Es un verdadero privilegio hablar de Andreas. Podríamos pasar varios minutos acá, pero quiero darle la bienvenida presentándole un poco para que todos sepamos quién es Andreas. Andreas es el director de Educación y Competencias de la Organización para la Cooperación y Desarrollo Económico, la OCDE. Es el fundador y director del Programa Internacional de Evaluación de Estudiantes PISA. Ha trabajado por más de 20 años con diferentes ministerios de educación y líderes educativos para mejorar la educación en el mundo. Andreas ha recibido varios premios, entre ellos el premio Theodor Heuss, otorgado en nombre del primer presidente de la República Federal de Alemania. Este premio por su compromiso democrático ejemplar. Es un privilegio, Andreas, tenerte hoy con nosotros. Agradecemos que estés en este espacio para compartir cosas tan importantes que sé que este foro estamos todos interesados. Quiero decirles que la conferencia de hoy será en inglés. Si ustedes quieren escuchar la traducción simultánea, es importante que por favor se aseguren que se mantienen en el canal de español para poder escuchar todo lo que Andreas tiene que compartirnos el día de hoy. Without further ado, please do welcome Andreas to this event. Andreas, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Yvonne. And it's such a pleasure to share this session with AFS and Ival. I think these are fantastic organizations to actually bring global competencies to the world. And our work at the OECD is really about making global competency visible and tangible for public policy. That's why we included those aspects in our PISA assessment. And I apologize for doing my presentation in English, but I know that we have a good translation to share it with you. It's really a new aspect that we introduced in the last PISA assessment. And we did this because we live in a world that is full of disruptions, and interconnections are so important. I think the pandemic has shown us, how closely we are connected across the world. And something that happens at one end in the world can affect everyone else very quickly after. And the same, this is not the only disruption. If you think about, climate change is probably going to have an even larger impact on our lives. And if you think about, artificial intelligence is going to be more disruptive than the pandemic and pushes us to think much harder what makes us human. No? We know how to educate second-class robots. People who are very good at, repeating what we've told them. But what makes us human in a world where the kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test have also become easy to digitize and automate. And then there are many other trends that we need to keep in mind, in this rapidly changing world. The pandemic has disrupted our education, but the future will always surprise us. Now, when we surveyed school principals, they said, we deal with those topics to a large extent. You can see, for example, in the OECD area, 9 out of 10 school leaders say, yes, climate change and global warming are part of the school curriculum. Or we talk about equality between men and women, or international conflicts, causes of poverty, migration, hunger, global health. School principals do a lot to embed those aspects in school curricula. But when you look at this through the lens of students, the picture looks very different. Take the environment. 8 out of 10 15-year-olds who we assessed in PISA say looking after the global environment is important to me. The climate agenda for young people has become important, urgent. But when you ask them, can you do something about this? The bar gets much shorter. Or when you ask them, do you think your behavior can impact people on other countries? The bar gets very short. This is the dilemma of our education systems. We teach a lot of passive knowledge. We make students recipients to a lot of information. But we do not give them that agency, that capacity to mobilize their cognitive, social, and emotional resources. And I know that's what the AFS is all about. But in our school systems, that is still very much missing. So we wanted to make that visible. That's why we included the assessment of global competencies in our PISA assessment. And first of all, we wanted to see whether people can, examine local, global, intercultural issues. No? When you drink a cup of coffee in London, do you understand that could have implications on farmers in Ecuador? No? Do young people understand the interconnectedness in our world? But that's just a starting point. Equally interesting and important for us is, can young people understand and appreciate different ways of thinking, different ways of working, different cultures? No? That's what makes our work interesting, to actually put ourselves into the perspective of others, to develop this empathy. That's the most human attribute. We try to look at this. And then, of course, when you understand other ways, other people, can you engage with them? Do you have access to different cultural tools? And last but not least, once again, can you mobilize your cognitive, social, and emotional resources? Are you willing to take action? In life, we know a lot of things. We can do a lot of things. But often, we still remain silent. These are the kind of questions that we surveyed young people, and we looked at this with many kind of instruments in the PISA assessment. Now we looked at knowledge, we tested the knowledge and skills, we looked at social skills and attitudes where we surveyed people, and we collected a lot of background data from school leaders, from teachers and parents. So let's look at the tests. Now, this is the countries that were included. These are the countries that were included in this test. It's not all of the PISA countries that took part in this. Tells you also something interesting. Some countries here that you see in gray, they look at mathematics, they look at science, they look at literacy, but they don't yet look at global competency now. So let's see how the countries came out on the test. You can see, Singapore is very high in the top, Canada is doing very well, Hong Kong, and so on the test. And when you look at these results, you think, oh, that looks quite similar than mathematics or science. Singapore is also doing really well in mathematics and science. That's true, but it's not, all of the story. You can see a country like Canada, yes, does well in math and science and does well in global competency, or even better in global competency. But there are interesting examples. You look at Colombia. Colombian students still struggle with mathematics and science. Now, they don't come out so well on the PISA test of cognitive skills. But you can see conditional on their cognitive performance. They do really well on the PISA assessment of global competency. This is a country, that was torn apart society, very kind of difficult social relationships. But it's a country that over decades has invested in intercultural understanding, in building the social glue that creates a society. You could see that in the performance of young people. So global competency is not equal to math and science. It's something extra. And you can look at a country like Korea that does very well in mathematics and science, but students struggle with global competency. So that's why it's worth to look at this separately from regular school assessments. So when you see those differences, you ask yourself, of course, what predicts the performance of young people on global competency? And then, you can see that has a lot to do with what happens in the lives of young people. Where students were more respectful for people from other cultures, they did better on this test. Where they had more positive attitudes to other people, to immigrant people. Where they showed greater cognitive adaptability, resilience. Where they were more aware of global issues. Where they were better in perspective taking. Where they showed greater interest in learning about other cultures. Now, those things all really matter. That's why it's worth to look not just at cognitive performance, but to look at those kinds of attitudes and aspirations. So let me do this in a little bit more detail. Now, first of all, students' awareness of global issues. Here you can see once again those kinds of average levels. They seem to be very, very high on average, but when you look at this across countries, you can see a lot of variability. At the top of the distribution, young people in Hong Kong, they're very well aware of an issue such as a pandemic, even before the pandemic had struck. These data were collected in 2018. Why? Yeah, because, those issues were quite familiar to students. In Saudi Arabia, very rarely being taught. And Latin America is very interesting. You can see a country like Mexico, where actually, pandemics played a role in the school. Awareness was quite good among students. But you look to Argentina, not so common. So you can see there's a lot of variability in students' awareness. What was interesting for us, girls were generally more aware than boys of global issues. Whether it's about the climate, whether it's about gender equality, whether it's about migration, health, girls generally were more connected to those global issues than boys in virtually all countries. And that includes Latin America, but also other regions of the world. It's surprising because they sit in the same classrooms. They were in the same families. Something to take into account. We also can see from the data that actually It's not just about school. You can see there's a very close connection between what happens in families and what happens in classrooms now. When parents were more aware of global issues, you could see students being more aware of global issues, at least in the countries for which we have those data, and that includes all of the countries in Latin America for which we have data now. Whether it's, Chile, whether it's Brazil, Dominican Republic, Mexico, or Panama, you can see that relationship is always positive. So global competency is something that we do not just learn in school, but that is around us, and our families play a very important role. Let me turn to the second question. To what extent are young people open to other ways of thinking, open to other cultures, other people? We looked at this, and when it comes, the first aspect is what we call cognitive adaptability or resilience. You can see on average across the OECD countries, over 60% of students say, yes, I can change my behavior to meet the needs of new situations. Or, 60% say, I can deal with unusual situations. I can easily adapt to a new culture. A little bit less common. Now, that was the shortest part on this comparison. And once again, these are averages, and averages always hide a lot of interesting variability. Let's look at this by country. And you can see, for example, at the end of the spectrum here, Vietnam, Macau, education systems with very strong academic performance. But when it comes to managing change, cognitive resilience, students had a hard time with this. No? They were very well taught in the academic disciplines, but when they had to deal with uncertainty, change, adapt to new situations, they didn't feel so comfortable with this. You look on the left hand, Mexico. Mexico does not do so well on the PISA test. Students struggle with reading, math, and science. But they have learned to live with change, with adversity. They can be resilient. But that's not true in all of Latin America. You can see, for example, if you look to Colombia, if you look to Argentina, if you look to Brazil, if you look to Chile, Panama, Peru, the bars go all down. Also there you can see resilience is often not a feature of the learning outcomes of those young people. So this is something to develop, to invest, to ensure that young people, can cope with uncertainty, disruptions, with new situations. The world is going to continue to change. The future will always surprise us. Let me turn to the next question. To what extent are young people open to the perspectives of other people? I sometimes try to understand my friends better by imagining how things look from their perspective. 2/3 of 15-year-olds say that is the case. I believe that there are two sides to every question. I try to look at both of those sides. 2/3 of young people on average. When I'm upset at someone, I try to take the perspective of that person for a while. 40%. Once again, the average hides a lot of variability, so it's interesting to look at this across countries. And you can also see, when it comes to empathy, openness to other perspectives, girls do much better than boys in every country for which we have data. Not just in Latin America, but in all countries for which we have data. Something that, in the education of boys, we don't seem to do so well to make them, more open and receptive to other viewpoints, to other perspectives, to manage and resolve conflicts. Now, that brings me to the next question. To what extent are students really interested in learning about other cultures? I want to learn how people live in different countries. Close to 60% of 15-year-olds say yes to this on average across countries. I'm interested in how people from various cultures see the world. Still over 50%. I'm interested in finding out about the traditions of other cultures. Also still over 50%. So young people generally are open to learning about other cultures. That's again the average. When you look at this by countries, you can see a very positive picture in many Latin American countries. if you look to Panama, if you look to Costa Rica, to Mexico, to Peru, to Brazil, you can see in general, young people in those countries, have that genuine interest in other cultures. That's a positive attribute. Some countries on the left where that is even stronger, but you can see on the other hand, some countries in Europe, if you look to the Slovak Republic, to Italy, to Hungary, to Germany, to the United Kingdom, that's where young people have access to all sorts of cultural resources, but often they lack that interest in other cultures. So there's something to develop in education. And once again, we can see a connection between what's going on in the families, where their parents were more interested in other people, other cultures, immigrants, young people, their children seem to be more interested in this. So once again, the family context playing a really important role in this. Respect for people from other cultures. Interest makes you sort of open, but do you then, appreciate, have respect for this? Generally, the values are very strong on average across countries. I respect people from other cultures as equal human beings, 80%. I treat all people with respect regardless of their cultural background. I respect the values of people from different cultures. Those values seem all quite strong. Also, students generally have positive attitudes towards immigrants. Now you can see 15-year-olds, over 80% say immigrant children should have the same opportunities for education that other children in the country have, or they should all have the same rights that everybody else in the country have. Now young people, believe in that kind of fairness. I think that's a very positive kind of attribute. But there is variability across countries. You can see, for example, in Portugal, in Canada, in Korea, there's generally very positive attitudes towards immigrants. You look at Hungary, the attitudes towards immigrants seems to be rather negative. So once again, countries come out quite differently on this, and that really shows how much the context makes a difference, and that includes the school systems, the policies and practice. I'm going to come back to this towards the end. And once again, the school is part of it, the family is another part of it. We see where parents had more positive attitudes towards immigrants, their children seem to be also having more positive attitudes towards immigrants in all countries for which we have comparative data. Let me put all of this together. The capacity of young people to take perspectives, to appreciate different ways of thinking, different cultures. Had, a positive relationship with the respect for people from other cultures. And that had a positive relationship towards, with the attitudes towards immigrants. And also cognitive adaptability. Being able to take different perspectives, having respect for people from other cultures, makes people more open to new kinds of ways of thinking. And that's what this cognitive resilience is about. But also your capacity to take perspectives makes people more interested in learning about other cultures. So you can see how those different features are really interconnected. Let me turn to the third aspect, the ability of young people to actually engage in effective communication. And you can see, the majority of students make an effort. I listen carefully to what they say. If there's a problem with communication, I always find ways around it. That's something very, very common across countries. In some countries, even more so. You can see, for example, in Albania, Korea, and Singapore, very strongly pronounced. In the Russian Federation, the Slovak Republic, Morocco, a little less so. But generally, students' awareness of intercultural communication seems to be quite well established, at least from those kinds of questionnaires. And you can see that awareness had a relationship with self-efficacy, with awareness of global issues, with the capacity of students to take perspectives, with their cognitive adaptability and resilience. So once again, making young people aware of the different facets of the world can have implications for many other aspects. It's not easy.
Technology does the opposite to you. Now, it connects you with people who think like you, who look like you, who work like you, and so on. So actually, technology tends to put us into bubbles of people who have the same opinion, who share similar beliefs. Getting out of those bubbles, it's really hard. But you can see when you do this, it has a lot of implications for many other aspects. And I know that's what the work of the AFS is doing so well. So actually connecting with people from other countries. Now, many young people have people from other countries in their circle of friends or sometimes in their family, certainly at school. You can see school is actually a place where people encounter a lot of diversity, and then the neighborhood as well. So those are the places where young people, 15-year-olds, say they have contact with people from other countries. Of course, there's variation. You can take a country like Switzerland, where everybody, it's a melting pot. You can see students have a lot of contact. Whereas in Brazil, that's still very rare because the country, is not so closely connected and with others through immigration and other factors. So it varies across countries. But what I wanted to show you here is that where young people have real contact with people from other cultures, they are more interested in learning about other cultures. It's not just about what you tell them in the school, the curriculum. It's very much to do with taking real contact with other people, where you actually meet them in your circle of friends in school. You tend to have a more positive interest in learning about their cultures. You also tend to have a more positive attitude towards immigrants, at least in most countries. Not in all, but in most countries. So those features seem to be really important. Language. Another important aspect that we studied. Now we look basically here, at the extent to which students speak 2 or more languages that you can see in countries, like Latvia, like Hong Kong, like Singapore. That's true for virtually every student, more than 9 out of 10 students. And Colombia and Mexico are good examples where that is still quite rare, and most of the Latin American countries are somewhere in the middle. It's also something that tends to be related to what's happening in the family, among the mother and the father. Why do I talk about languages? I talk about languages because we see that speaking 2 or more languages relates positively to the capacity of young people to take perspectives, to appreciate different ways of thinking. Language is not just a communication tool. Language opens the door to other worlds, to other cultures. When you learn a foreign language, that's the first time you think about your own language. You understand the concept of language. You understand the concept of different ways of thinking. And you can see that in the data. The young people speak multiple languages, they tend to be more open to different perspectives. They also show more positive respect for people from other cultures. You speak a language of a culture, you understand that culture, and suddenly you get interested. You pay respect to that culture. Some people would say, well, do I need to learn a language these days because, Google Translate can do all of that work for me? And yes, probably. If you're just interested, in just understanding text from other languages, probably it's not worth to learn the language for this. But if you think about as a window to the world, as a tool to understand different people, different cultures, it is a very powerful tool, as you can see from the data here. Now, that was all about, the factors that underlie this. I want to come back to where I started with. Student agency. Not just about learning about other cultures and engaging with them. It's really about taking responsibility for the world and the development together with people from other cultures. Once again, here you can see looking after the global environment is important to people, but agency is often not sufficiently developed. That's what, education systems need to do. And it's again, some things where students have a stronger sense of agency, they tend to be more aware of intercultural communication, where they tend to be more interested in learning about other cultures. They tend to have more positive attitudes towards immigrants. So those issues are really, really important. So what can we do about this? How can we, help people take action? I know the AFS will tell you, send people around, get people into contact. But, what can school systems do today in very practical terms? And you can see every school can do a lot. You can see, for example, students themselves already, do a lot when it comes to the environment. 70% of students in the OECD area say, I reduce the energy I use at home to protect the environment. I keep myself informed about world events. I regularly read websites on international social issues, still over 40%. I choose certain products for ethical or environmental reasons, even if they're more expensive, over 40%. So you can see there's a fair amount of energy among young people that we can harvest in school by providing more active learning opportunities that allow students to engage with those kinds of issues. And surprise, surprise, you can see that is often related again to what's happening in the families. Where families take greater levels of action, their children seem to be also taking more action in those kinds of fields. And, the actions that students take relate to many other features. You can see, for example, where students had more positive attitudes towards immigrants, or greater cognitive ability, students' interest in learning about other cultures. All of those issues relate to the very practical actions they are taking. That's not about passive learning. That's really about agency in the classroom. And so, how do students learn about other cultures? Well, that's the final section I wanted to share with you. In our school, students learn about different cultural perspectives on historical and social events. School leaders say in 9 out of 10 schools that's the case. And in our school, students learn about the cultures, the beliefs and so on. But this is very much about, teaching something in social science, in history, and so on. When it actually comes to, in our school, we celebrate festivities from other cultures. It's much less rare. Or our school offers an exchange program with schools in other countries. It's also quite rare. No? And as you saw before, it's those activities, the action, that really, relates to the attitudes and the openness among young people. No? We fill them with a lot of knowledge. We convey a lot of kind of information to young people. But the opportunities that schools provide for real engagement are still very limited. But it varies across countries. When it comes to, for example, celebration of cultural festivities, you can see Panama and Brazil in Latin America are very, very strong on this. It's very common for young people to experience other cultures in their local environment. No? The doors of schools are often open. Schools are engaged in this. But you can see in Argentina, another country in Latin America, that's still not common. No? So there's something that Argentina could be learning from Brazil or Panama in this field. No? Because we could see, sometimes, it's not about traveling around the world. It's about, going to your neighborhood, experiencing the cultures around you that actually can make a big difference in this. Of course, student exchanges are also important, and you can see countries like Singapore and Slovenia are very, very strong on this, but those things tend to be quite expensive. So you can understand, for example, in Latin America, Colombia, Peru, Argentina, Mexico, and so on, that's very, very hard to do simply because it takes a lot of resources. But, engaging communities is something much easier to do. And it's not just the experience, also the attitudes that matter. Basically, what we could see is where students perceive their teachers to display discrimination towards immigrants, people from other cultures. Students themselves tend to have negative attitudes to those people. It's not just what teachers say. It's the behavior, the attitudes that students perceive that seem to be having a strong relationship to students' own attitudes. As a great teacher today, it's not just about, what you say to your students, it's about who you are and how you behave that seem to make a difference on this. So when we ask students, what are the learning opportunities at school? I learn about different cultures, over 70%. But I participate in events celebrating cultural diversity throughout the school year. That seems to be still very little now. And number of learning activities, now when I could look all of this together, and Latin America actually is quite well positioned on this. Most of the countries here, whether you look to the Dominican Republic, to Colombia, to Peru, to Mexico, you can see actually some countries in Latin America do a lot of learning on these things at schools. And those things do matter. Now, basically, the more, learning activities went on, the more interest students had in learning about other cultures, the more they were aware of global issues, the greater agency they had, the higher level of cognitive adaptability. So those things all really matter. And with this, I really wanted to conclude, to give us enough time for discussing the findings. What you can really see is how education can make a real difference. But that difference does not come from what is in the curriculum alone, or what is being, said to young people. That difference comes first and foremost from the activities, from the real engagement that young people have, and the opportunities they have to meet people from other cultures and other traditions. Gracias. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. Truly a powerful tool, as you were explaining. It is a powerful tool, and it brings to me some questions that I would like to, before we open to the public here, to answer, to present some questions to you. It was very interesting for me to listen that you were talking about this dilemma that we have in education, that we tend to teach a lot on a lot of passive competences and knowledge, but we are not doing enough on everything that has to do with all those cognitive competences that do work on social and emotional competences. Based on your wide experience and what the study is saying here, because this is a powerful tool, what have you observed to be very good practices on developing more of these more social and communication and emotional competences?
Yeah, in fact, you do see a lot of good examples in many schools, and it's all about social and relational learning. In a classroom as a teacher, you can organize learning environments where students take responsibility for each other, where they share their experience, where stronger students help weaker students in their learning. I think there's a lot you can do to structure those environments, and some countries are very, very good at that. We could see that when we tested collaborative problem-solving skills, and where students had learned to work together on problems, they were much better on those kinds of environments. But it's really about experiential learning. Social and emotional skills you do not teach in the abstract. You teach by giving students, opportunities to work with others, to work on real problems that have real consequences, and to engage with real people.
Thank you. We're going to ask everybody if you have questions for Andreas on this very important presentation that he has shared with us. You can write your questions in the chat, and we will be bringing them up so that we can share with Andreas all your insights and questions for him, please. So do please write your questions in the chat so that we can have this conversation with Andreas. Andreas, knowing, Latin America is a very diverse part of the American continent, let's put it that way, out of the world, of course. We do have all these incredible gaps of wealth and distribution of wealth and education, obviously, ethnic diversity groups. We have issues with access. I mean, Latin America is a very complex and diverse area of this continent. How can the development of global competences help us close those gaps? Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, first of all, I presented the example of Colombia. I think it's a very interesting story where actually the country for 10, 15 years has just put an emphasis on this. How can we create a social fabric in our country, actually, to build social ties, to strengthen, understanding, respect among people. And you can see it's actually visible in the results. You give young people this assessment, you can see they come out well. So it's not rocket science, and it doesn't require, making everybody wealthier. I think that's just the attention that we pay to those kinds of aspects. I think one of the biggest problems in education, also in Latin America, is, a trend towards commodifying education. We have made students passive consumers of learning. We have made parents clients. We have made teachers service providers. And we have lost, that social fabric, that actually education is a whole of society project. And where we can actually bring that together, we see different results. So I don't think it's really so difficult. You cannot change the income inequality in education in the short term, but you can actually ensure that young people understand those kinds of dynamics and issues and feel responsibility for this, that young people grow up in a world where they feel empowerment, where they feel agency, where they feel a high degree of self-efficacy. I think those things can be done. But I also think, Latin America can go beyond this. Latin America could do better to attract the most talented teachers to the most challenging schools. You could learn that from countries like Vietnam or China. They also have a lot of income inequality and inequality in society, but they have been much better to use education as a tool to moderate inequality, to ensure that every child benefits from excellent teaching. So I think, you can do something within the current system in the classroom, but you can also change the system by aligning resources better with the needs of people. Now in Latin America, you take a country like Chile, education is very fragmented. You have many parallel systems, and often, the school system does not bring society together, which is its potential, but it often, reinforces existing divisions. And I think those things need to be addressed.
That is so true, Andreas, and we've seen some examples of that. We have a lot of people of the educational world here with us today. There's a question somebody's asking here, and it's asking: is it more important the cognitive part than the affective part, or do they go together alone, or is it one more important than the other? Talking about cognitive and affective.
Well, I think they really belong together, and in the world of tomorrow more so than today. You want a great engineer, but you want an engineer who makes ethical decisions. You want, and I think we should see the cognitive and the social and emotional aspects as two sides of the same coin. And particularly in the world in which we live. You can be very smart in mathematics and science, but you can still make very harmful decisions for your society. And therefore, I think that in the cognitive aspects, we know how to assess. We know how to make them visible. On the social emotional side, we often still take this as a byproduct of education, as something that, somehow happens, as a magic, behind. I think we have to bring that more into the light. We have to make this more a conscious process. We have to also reward teachers for making a contribution to this. Now, not just the teacher who produces the best mathematics scores, but also the teacher who invests in the social fabric of the school, or who helps, the children who struggle most. I think that's going to be increasingly important. Now, once again, the kind of things that are easy to teach, easy to test, they're going to be easy to digitize, to automate in the world in the years to come. Now, they are going to actually become less important. It's the social and emotional dimensions that are going to be of increasing importance.
What makes us human, and we tend to forget that it's not only schools, has to do with the families. You were discussing this a little bit on the results that you were sharing. The students, the teachers, the family, the society that is around everybody. There is a question here for you too that says something like, do you know if there's a plan, work plan or something in Latin America that regarding the pandemic is actually thinking about restructuring the education that we have right now, and including more of these social, emotional competences? Have you heard of a plan or either worldly or in Latin America about this?
I'm not so familiar with the plans in Latin America, but in many countries, actually, there is a very active discussion about this. In fact, the pandemic has shown that very clearly, where students had learned how to learn, where they could, manage their emotions, where they were resilient and could set their own learning goals, could learn independently, had, strong social support around them. They could cope with school closures. The pandemic was not so devastating. But where students used to be spoon-fed by their teachers, where they didn't have strong support around them, those are the students who were left so badly behind. So I think the pandemic has really highlighted the importance to devote more attention to the social and emotional dimensions. And I think many countries are taking the lesson from that. Many countries are trying to sort of embed that into the redesign of their school curricula. But, the hard part is to change classroom practice. It's very easy to write beautiful words into the curriculum. Most schools say we try to develop, the whole child, holistic student development. But when you go into classrooms, you see very, traditional learning often still. And I think that's what needs to really change, that actually the educational practice in the classrooms takes more account of this. And that's, I think, what will take time. But I hope, that, we will not go back to the status quo after this pandemic, but we will take that lesson and actually ensure that we have, pay more attention, not just, to social emotional skills, but also to attitudes, to values, to, learning today is no longer about, teaching people something. It's about helping them develop a reliable compass and the tools to navigate with confidence through the world that is increasingly complex, volatile, ambiguous. No? That's so important.
Thank you. There's a question here about art. Do you think that art could be a fundamental pillar for developing the interest of other cultures?
Absolutely. I think culture expresses itself often in arts, and I think arts is a great way to teach about other cultures, a great way to foster creativity, a great way to foster active learning, experiential learning. So I think, the arts, musics, they have a very, very important role to play in the future of education. Once again, this is what makes us different from the artificial intelligence in our computers. So I think that's where we should be investing.
Great. There's a lot of comments in the chat here that our countries, they do very little regarding the psychosocial, emotional stability and all those kind of capabilities. And that they do see that a lot of the government programs are not investing in this. So there's a concern when they see this, that we're not doing a lot in our region is what I'm hearing here in the chat. How do we compare the competences, the global competence, to the abilities of thought that are actually being evaluated in the PISA?
I think PISA tries to make those things visible, and that's often a very first step for public policy to take action. Things that we do not see, we cannot change, and we do not improve. That's one of the biggest problems that we often have, that we talk about global competency or social emotional skills, but then, we only evaluate reading and math and language, and therefore, we do not see those kinds of aspects. I think making those things visible is what the PISA assessment tries to do. And I hope that it will lead among policymakers to a deeper understanding, to pay more attention to this. But this is not so much about, money or laws and regulation. It's very much about the social fabric in schools. Do we create an environment in which students have, more room for agency, where they can, experiment, where they can try out things, where they can live and work with other people from, other cultures. I think that's the hard part. It's not just about, having governments making decisions or changing curricula. It's very much about changing the learning environments in our schools, where students, and as a student, service learning is a very, very powerful way. You can actually work with other people. You can do mentoring and tutoring for other students. There's so many ways in which we could be doing this, but it's really a changing practice. It's not just about changing policy.
Here, that what you're saying is so true, and we do have in our audience here today a lot of representatives of the ministries of education, and also school headmasters or principals right now here with us. If you were to recommend to them two very punctual things, two very exact things that they could actually set in place tomorrow at their schools to turn in these results around, to start doing something at the school level.
Yeah, I think in education as policymakers, we spend too much time, pushing new ideas into schools and classrooms. I think we should do more to find the good ideas in the classrooms and to scale and spread them. I think the biggest contribution you can make as in a Ministry of Education is really about, creating openness in the system and more permeability. We have so many vertical structures in education. We feed information upwards, We need to build stronger lateral structures. We need to better connect teachers, better connect schools, and to create more opportunities for collaboration within the school and across the school system. And if we achieve that, I think the systems will become stronger. Now, even the best education minister cannot, adequately address the needs of millions of students and hundreds of thousands of teachers. But if the education system knows what its teachers know, it will actually be a much stronger system.
Thank you, Andreas. It is a powerful tool. Truly, it is. These results are very eye-opener, and I think we can do so many things when we have this opportunity to listen to everything that you have to share today with us. So thank you for your time and your disposition to discuss these results with the Latin American teachers and all the educational authorities that are here today with us. We in AFS have always been grateful and value the collaboration between the OECD and AFS. There is still a long way to go. From our side in AFS, we are committed to keep developing active global citizens and also equipping teachers and schools with tools and learning moments like this one to do so. So very, very grateful to have you here and sharing your time and your knowledge with us. And we appreciate having you here. So we're gonna close right now with that. And thank you, Andreas, again.
Thank you as well. And thank you for the work you do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Gracias, Ivonne, por tu tiempo para este evento. Antes de terminar, aprovechamos la oportunidad para contarles que AFS, Programas Interculturales y ALEI lanzaron el diplomado en Competencias Globales para educadores con becas de hasta el 50% de descuento. Este programa de aprendizaje está basado en investigaciones que proporciona a los participantes habilidades globales tangibles. Para más información, pueden ingresar al sitio web que indicamos en la pantalla, alei.afs.org/diplomado, o escribirnos al correo alei.educación@afs.org. Queremos también invitarlos a ser parte de la comunidad de docentes de ALEI para Latinoamérica. Es un espacio virtual creado por AFS para educadores de Latinoamérica interesados en crear espacios educativos globales más inclusivos, diversos y respetuosos de las diferencias. Les vamos a enviar la información a quienes en la encuesta de evaluación del evento nos manifestaron su interés para pertenecer a la comunidad. Y asimismo les estaremos compartiendo el link de inscripción en el chat para los que aún no se sumaron y para compartir con sus colegas docentes. Para conocer los programas que ofrece AFS y más detalles de las actividades que llevamos adelante, los invitamos a visitar el sitio web de AFS a nivel internacional. Y en cada uno de los siguientes países también tenemos nuestra oficina de AFS para que se familiaricen con las opciones de los programas locales. No queremos despedirnos sin antes comentarles que esto apenas empieza. En unos minutos habrá un taller interactivo con actividades para ayudar a los estudiantes a suspender el juicio de valor y generar curiosidad. Si no se han inscrito, pueden hacerlo ingresando a la página web alei.afs.org/SIEG y tengan en cuenta que cada evento tiene un enlace para conexión diferente. Los invito a descubrir los eventos del resto de la semana. Estaremos hasta el día viernes con 2 eventos cada día. Queremos pedirles que nos completen una breve encuesta para contarnos sus impresiones sobre el evento del día de hoy. Pueden hacerle ingresando al código QR que va a aparecer ahora en pantalla o al enlace que les van a estar compartiendo por el chat en este momento. Todo aquel que quiera tener un certificado de su participación en el evento tiene un costo de emisión de $7. Al finalizar la semana se recibirá un correo donde podrán solicitar todos los certificados de las diferentes sesiones a las que participaron. Quien solicita más de 2 va a tener un precio especial, puede conversarlo con cada una de las oficinas de su país, la forma de pago. Para poder recibir el certificado deberá haber asistido a la sesión completa y haber llenado la evaluación esta que les presentamos aquí. Bueno, antes de finalizar esta sesión, queremos agradecer nuevamente al público por haber estado presente. Para FS, la Semana Iberoamericana es la oportunidad de materializar nuestra misión y visión y transformar a personas en ciudadanos globales. Antes de irnos, voy a dejar de compartir pantalla. Me gustaría poder invitarlos a todos a que abran sus cámaras, que podamos así tomar una foto, así nos queda registro de este evento que es a nivel latinoamericano, más que nada. Si bien en la foto si bien estamos saliendo por YouTube, en la foto estarán los que están saliendo en el Zoom. Son varias las pantallitas en las que les estamos sacando una foto. Somos muchos todavía conectados, pero la verdad que nos alegra mucho tanta gente que esté hoy acá presente. Bueno, les agradecemos a todos por haber participado y nos vemos quienes quieran estar en el próximo taller, que estará arrancando en algo así como 40 minutos. Muchas gracias por haber estado hoy con nosotros.